Right, everybody, and we are back talking about our third straight AFC South team. This time, the Jacksonville Jaguars, the victors of the AFC South just last season. And I know for a fact this is going to be a really fun one to talk about. So, while it doesn't look like it here, Jacksonville does have a bit of a rough postseason history. One of four teams that have never made a Super Bowl appearance alongside the Houston Texans, Detroit Lions, and Cleveland Browns, only having four postseason appearances since the turn of the century, and just two since 2007. So, really, not a lot of encouraging seasons here. And when they do miss the playoffs here, a lot of these seasons are really rough. So, Jacksonville, they have that magical season in 2017, the Saxonville season, if you will, before once again bottoming out around 2020 and 2021. But luckily, that gave them two first overall selections in the 2021 and 22 drafts. They used those on quarterback Trevor Lawerence and outside linebacker, pass rusher, if you will, Trayvon Walker. So, that being said, let's look at this 2022 Jaguars team because this was a really fun season and certainly a really fun team to watch. Of course, have to mention Doug Peterson comes in after a year off from coaching, formerly head coach of the Philadelphia Eagles, winning Super Bowl 52 with the Philadelphia Eagles back in 2017. He enters the picture with the Jacksonville Jaguars and certainly turns things around very quickly for them, although it wasn't necessarily that pretty right off the bat, as we'll see in a second with the schedule. But first, just wanted to point out Jacksonville did end up with a top 10 offense last year, both in terms of points and yardage, whereas the defense wasn't necessarily bad. It was 12th in terms of points allowed and 24th in yards, so not amazing, but in the top 5 for turnovers, in the top 5 for fumbles, so definitely some encouraging stuff with the Jacksonville Jaguars so far. This was a playoff team last year, so you expect that. And then before we look at the schedule here, also wanted to point out the Jacksonville Jaguars were best in the league in terms of getting off the field on fourth down. So if anybody was trying to go up against the Jaguars on a fourth down, odds are they weren't converting it. So certainly something that is always good to have in your arsenal. But that being said, they were one of the worst teams on third down conversions. So take that at what you will. Now, looking at this 2022 Jaguars schedule, this was really a roller coaster of a season. Certainly an emotional one. It had its highs and lows, absolutely. They start out with a 4-8 record here, so and even 2-6 over the first 8 weeks of the season. And these were not against very good teams either. They lose to the Washington Commanders by one score in week 1, when they were then led by quarterback Carson Wentz, Doug Peterson's former quarterback in Philadelphia. Then he defeats his former assistant coach Frank Reich in week 2 before beating the Los Angeles Chargers in week 3. So they start off 2-1. Things are looking up for the Jacksonville Jaguars. Then they narrowly lose to the Philadelphia Eagles in week 4. Okay, Eagles are a good team, that makes sense. But then week 5, week 6, lose to the Colts and Texans by a touchdown. Not good stuff there. Lose by a touchdown to the Giants, lose by 4 points to the Broncos, lose by 7 points to the Raiders. So these are all one-score games. So Jacksonville's certainly hanging around in these games, but they're starting to pile up. And by the time we get to the end of October, they're sitting here with a 2-6 record. And they are able to defeat the Las Vegas Raiders the following week before dropping a game to the Kansas City Chiefs, Doug Peterson's old mentor Andy Reid, in week 10. Heading into their bye weeks, they're at their bye week with a record of 3-7. Certainly not something you would expect from a team that we're talking about ending up making the playoffs and then winning a game once they get to the playoffs. But coming out of the bye week, they narrowly defeat the Baltimore Ravens 28-27, so win by 1 point before getting shellacked the following week at Detroit by a score of 40-14. So this is December 4th now we're talking about, where Jacksonville's sitting here with a 4-8 record. They just lost 40-14 to a Detroit team which Really, you could say in hindsight, Detroit was kind of the equivalent of Jacksonville in the NFC. They certainly caught fire at the end of the season, but Jacksonville didn't really know that at the time. Very easily would have been able to get down on themselves here, say, yeah, you know what, our season's over. We made some strides, but we'll get them next year. We'll win these close games next time. But Jacksonville rights the ship here. They definitely were a resilient bunch of the season. So they come back with a huge game against the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee was really the only other team truly in contention for that AFC South. In fact, Tennessee was in the driver's seat for the AFC South for most of the season because the Texans and Colts were absolutely abysmal, as we've already talked about, and Jacksonville's sitting here with a 4-8 record. So if Tennessee wins this game, they could have pretty much put Jacksonville away and had this division all but locked up. But Jacksonville responds. They go into Nissan Stadium and win 36-22. So absolutely encouraging there. But then the following week, they come home against the Dallas Cowboys. And this pretty much every game from here on, from this Tennessee game on, is a must win just for them to mathematically remain alive in the playoffs. Not morally or, yeah, we feel like our season's over if we lose this. No, you lose any one of these games, there is no way you're making the playoffs. It is not physically possible, mathematically possible. So with that being said, this very well, I know a lot of people are going to talk about how the Los Angeles Chargers game in the playoffs was their game of the year, and believe me, we will get there, but you don't have that game without this game against the Dallas Cowboys in Week 15, and this really was where I think their season really turned around. Like this was truly the turning point of their season where you could see they were a resilient bunch. You could see that they really believed in one another. They believed in the coaching staff. The teammates absolutely believed in each other. The city of Jacksonville, the county of Duval, they were all starting to unite behind this team. It was really a beautiful thing to watch, especially at the expense of the Dallas Cowboys of all teams. But Dallas was up very big in this game, and they were in the driver's seat for a very long time. But Jacksonville creeps back in. They never give up. Every offensive drive, they're just trying to get that next first down, just trying to get that next 10 yards, trying to get that next touchdown, just trying to get points on the board. And you know what? It ends up adding up. And the defense, they just want that next stop. All right, try to get these next 3 plays done, get the offense back on the field, get the ball back in Trevor's hands. Then by the time we get to overtime, Dallas ends up with the football, but doesn't matter because Dak Prescott ends up throwing a pick six, and the Jacksonville Jaguars win in magnificent walk-off fashion by a score of 40-34, an absolute thriller. One of the best games of last season, easily. Certainly one that probably isn't getting mentioned enough. There were a ton of amazing games in the 2022 NFL season, but this one absolutely deserves to be up there for one of the best ones. So following that up, they go to New York against the Jets, and they just absolutely dominate 19-3 in the driver's seat through and through. And this was on a short week too, coming off of an overtime game. So you know these guys were tired coming from playing at 1 o'clock on a Sunday in North Florida to having to be in North Jersey on a Thursday night against the New York Jets. But they hold them to a score of just 3 points, and then the following week they're at the Houston Texans, so still on the road. They're able to win 31-3. You can tell they're really starting to come into their own by this point of the season. So much so that now this Week 18 matchup against the Tennessee Titans, this was a winner-go-home game for both teams. If the Tennessee Titans won this game, AFC South was theirs. Jaguars are out of the playoffs. Jacksonville Jaguars win this game. They're in the AFC South crown. They're in the playoffs with a game at home. Tennessee's sitting at home. And that's what ends up happening. Jacksonville ends up winning this game 20-16. So when they needed to have it, they got it. Didn't matter that they started 2-6. Didn't matter they were 3-7 going into the bye week. Didn't matter they were 4-8 in December. Didn't matter that they were down by, I believe, 3 or 4 scores at one point. It was definitely a 3-score game. I did just watch the highlights of this game before recording this, but I believe it was 27-7, I want to say. So Jacksonville was a 27-10 actually, now that I think about it. It was 27-10. I do remember that. So it was a score of 27-10 in the second half, and you're down 17 points, three-score game, and you're able to rally and defeat the Dallas Cowboys. Didn't matter. Didn't matter that you needed to beat Tennessee twice in the span of just a few weeks. They did it. Then we get to the playoffs, and this was just their magnum opus against the Los Angeles Chargers. Los Angeles was up 27-0 in this game right before the half, but again, did not matter to this team. They rally back and win by a score of 31-30. Big Balls Doug in vintage fashion goes for two with time winding down in regulation. Not San Diego. Los Angeles was up 30-20. So the Jaguars score a touchdown, and instead of just kicking the extra point to get down by a field goal, they go for two and they get it. So then when they get the ball back on their next possession, all they had to do is just go down and kick this field goal to win 31-30. Absolutely amazing for the city of Jacksonville and the whole county of Duval. You could really argue we did have some tremendous playoff games last year. Certainly think of Super Bowl 57. Certainly think of the AFC Championship game. But this very well may have been the game of the playoffs last year, even though it came in the first round. It really was just an absolute classic. And this is one that they're going to be showing on NFL Network for generations to come. This is something that kids born in like the 2050s are going to be seeing on like a highlight reel. Remember that time that Trevor Lawerence and Doug Peterson came back from 27 points in a wild card playoff game? It's going to be like how people now look back at like Frank Reich coming back with against the Houston Oilers with the Buffalo Bills in the early 90s, or the Music City Miracle, or the 49ers and the Packers in the late 90s, the Catch 2.0 with Terrell Owens. Just one of those instant classics where you know that people are going to be talking about this game for a long, long, long time. And that's really like, even if the Jacksonville Jaguars don't end up winning the Super Bowl during this era of Trevor Lawerence and Doug Peterson, Trayvon Walker, Josh Allen, whatever names you want to throw out there, Travis Etienne, they can always hang their hat on this game because this game will forever be in NFL lore as one of the all-time greats. So can't stress enough how impressive that victory was. So sorry, I went on for a really long time about this 2022 Jaguars team, and we haven't even looked at the individual statistics yet, but try to keep this as brief as I can. Definitely very enthusiastic about this team, if you couldn't tell. So Trevor Lawerence, he had a rough rookie campaign in 2021, but he comes back with a really solid showing last year. Starts all 17 games, so as we say, best ability is availability. Throws over 4,000 yards, 25 touchdowns, just 8 interceptions. Really solid sophomore campaign for Trevor Lawerence. 3 fourth quarter comebacks and 2 game-winning drives. So certainly somebody who can deliver in the clutch. And he's somebody who really, as we go into 2023, I know there's going to be a lot of fantastic players this year, and the MVP's certainly become a more quarterback-driven award, although there are spectacular players who are really valuable to their team at other positions. I think of Justin Jefferson and Micah Parsons, Austin Eckler, just off the top of my head, but I know just looking in terms of the quarterback position, yes, there will be a lot of hype this year around guys like Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts, even Aaron Rodgers, but I wouldn't count out Trevor Lawerence as a dark horse for the MVP in 2023, especially if Jacksonville has a solid season and takes this AFC South with ease, which they very well may. He really does have just amazing natural ability, and he was really able to hone his skills last year in the new offense under Doug Peterson and Press Taylor. He did have some slip-ups, as any young quarterback still will, but if he could take another leap from year 2 to year 3, especially if it's even a fraction of the leap he took from year 1 to year 2, do not sleep on Trevor Lawerence as the MVP of the National Football League this year. Say that right now on the record in August of 2023. Moving along to the receiving core, Christian Kirk ends with over 1,100 yards, 8 touchdowns. Zay Jones and Evan Ingram not too far behind him, so I remember when Christian Kirk signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars originally, there was a lot of talk about how he got really overpaid coming from the Arizona Cardinals, and this just is another example of how receivers are just getting so overpaid in the NFL, running backs are underpaid, and while that narrative is absolutely still true, Christian Kirk held up his end of the bargain and really gave Jacksonville a solid number one option last season for Trevor Lawerence, so can't really hold that one against Christian Kirk here, though there are plenty of other egregious examples of wide receivers being overpaid, as I broke down in my what's going on with the running back position video. But looking now at the running back position for the Jaguars, Travis Etienne, really his rookie season this year, he missed his actual rookie season in 2021 with an injury, didn't get to play a single snap for the Jaguars. So he comes in and has 1,100 yards on the ground, 5 touchdowns, another 35 receptions with 316 receiving yards. So really fantastic stuff from Travis Etienne. Love to see that. Moving along here, we'll look at their defense very briefly. So did find it interesting to note Jacksonville had 4 players with 3 interceptions. Rashawn Jenkins also with 3 forced fumbles as well. Then looking at the anti-Josh Allen, not the one of the Buffalo Bills, the one of the Jacksonville Jaguars. It's funny because he is actually a really tremendous player in his own right. You could definitely say he was the best player on this entire Jaguars defense last year. Gets to the quarterback 7 times, 4 forced fumbles, 2 fumble recoveries, and even runs one back 38 yards for a touchdown. So love to see that from Josh Allen. Definitely one of the key cogs in this Jacksonville defense. Now, looking at Jacksonville's offseason, sorry about that. Just need a little bit of water talking so much about the Jacksonville Jaguars. Running out of breath, but there really wasn't a lot of turnover with this Jacksonville Jaguars team this offseason. So they do have a couple key departures. The most notable one being Jawan Taylor, their starting right tackle last year, plays 97.7% of snaps, currently at age 26. He departs to the Kansas City Chiefs, who lost their own tackles. I actually believe that Kansas City will be our next video, so we'll look at that more in depth there. But yet again, Kansas City is swapping out both of their tackles, much like they did following Super Bowl 55 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But we'll discuss that further in the Kansas City video. For the Jacksonville Jaguars, though, they do lose Jawan Taylor, which will be a huge loss. As we'll see later on when we get to the draft, they do address the tackle position, but really the only other notable losses they have are wide receiver Marvin Jones, who we know is going back to the Detroit Lions, currently at age 33, and then they lose their kicker, what's his name? Riley Patterson, also going to the Detroit Lions. So that's really it. Jacksonville really doesn't lose any other notable players here. They lose a couple guys who were more of a reserve role for them last season, but for a team that made the playoffs last year and won their division, absolutely an encouraging sign that they only lost really 3 starters. And I'll mention right now, one of the additions they bring in is Brandon McManus. So I would say they absolutely upgraded the kicking position. So for a team that figures to be in a lot of close games in 2023, or at the very least, I guess I should say should figure to be in field goal range a lot, definitely good to have a kicker like Brandon McManus, who you know has a proven track record of just being able to deliver. So love that move for Jacksonville, bringing him in. Some other additions they bring in, really not too much in free agency here. Most of these players they bring in are simply going to be reserve pieces, but one guy I will mention who's actually not listed here is Calvin Ridley, wide receiver formerly of the Atlanta Falcons. Of course, he was suspended all of last season, although he technically isn't an addition for this season. Jacksonville traded for him in the middle of last season, but that was in the middle of his suspension, so I'd say he is a new addition for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year. This will be the first time we'll see him on the field, so certainly an upgrade from Marvin Jones. Really do think people have quickly forgotten about just how good Calvin Ridley was when he played with the Atlanta Falcons. Yes, he was more of a number 2 option behind Julio Jones, but he was still so young when he was with the Atlanta Falcons, and now he's really in his prime years. No, he hasn't played NFL football in, probably since the beginning of the 2021 season. We're talking about 2 full calendar years. Really hasn't played a full season since 2020, and that was the weird season for obvious reasons. So it'll be good to see Calvin Ridley just in action for a full 17 games this year with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I feel like this group will really embrace him. I do. I think Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawerence, Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, the rest of that offense, Travis Etienne, they're going to welcome him with open arms, and he really has the potential to have a big season this year with them. So with that being said, let's look at Jacksonville's 2023 draft. So for a team that finished as a division winner and winning the first round against the Los Angeles Chargers, they end up with 13 draft picks here, which is pretty crazy for a playoff team, but most of these are in the later rounds. They only have one pick in each of the first 3 rounds, two in the fourth and fifth round, and then 3 picks in the sixth and seventh round each. So definitely the standout name here is Anton Harrison, offensive tackle from the University of Oklahoma, who they select in the first round. And he's probably the only player from this draft class who figures to start, at least right away. He will be the replacement for Jawan Taylor at the right tackle position, so Jacksonville gets to save a little bit of coin by not paying Jawan Taylor, and they have a young replacement already ready for him with Anton Harrison. Some of these other players they do draft, though, certainly will figure to play a key role in Jacksonville's scheme this year. Tank Bigsby should be their backup running back behind Travis Etienne. Brenton Strange should be their backup tight end behind Evan Ingram. And then many of these players here in the middle round selected on defense. Antonio Johnson, he should figure to play a role on safety as a reserve. And we'll break this down more when we get to the depth chart, which honestly, this is probably a good chance to do so right now, so we can really see how these guys fill in for the Jaguars. Now, this is the 2023 Jaguars depth chart, at least unofficially. Still a lot of time to go before the season actually starts, but we'll kick it off here with the quarterback position. Definitely the least to talk about here. Trevor Lawrence's job, we know this. We know as long as he's healthy, he's going to be in there and producing for the Jacksonville Jaguars. And it seems Jacksonville isn't really too worried about an injury because they really don't have much of a backup plan behind him. They have C.J. Beathard, formerly of the San Francisco 49ers, but he really hasn't been somebody who's proven he could play effectively at the NFL level, at least not from my perspective at least. I'd be interested to know if there's any differing opinions on C.J. Beathard out there, but I don't have a lot of confidence in him stepping in as the backup for Trevor Lawrence if need be. But I don't think that'll be the case. Hopefully, fingers crossed, Trevor Lawrence stays healthy and has a very successful 2023 campaign. So now looking at the running back position, of course Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence's college teammate from Clemson, projected to be their starting running back, no surprises there. And as I just mentioned a minute ago, the rookie Tank Bigsby out of Auburn, slated to be their backup running back. Not really too much competition for him at that spot either, so certainly be interested to see if Jacksonville uses him in quite an expanded role compared to perhaps what people might anticipate for a third-round pick like Tank Bigsby. I don't think he's going to eat too much into Travis Etienne's reps, but when they do run 2 running back sets, or if they do have somebody out there besides Travis Etienne, I think Tank's the guy for that. Because looking at the third running back spot, it looks like right now it's JaMycal Hasty, although there is a competition going on at the end of this depth chart between Snoop Connor and Dearness Johnson, formerly of the Cleveland Browns. So I think this is definitely a 2-man gig. Certainly seems to be common with a lot of NFL teams right now where they don't really want to invest in one elite running back, but they don't really want to have more than 2 that they really have heavily involved in the offense. It seems the tandem is certainly the way to go. And this is nothing new in the NFL. We've seen this for decades now. I know teams are certainly wising up in terms of paying these guys the money they probably deserve, but the concept of a tandem and a 1-2 punch at running back is nothing new, and I don't think it's going anywhere anytime soon. So in this case, it's Travis Etienne and Tank Bigsby. Moving along to the tight end position, Jacksonville's actually surprisingly deep at tight end here, so they have Evan Ingram as the starter, third-year man Luke Farrell backing him up, and then Brenton Strange, the second-round pick from this year, currently penciled in as the number 3 tight end, although would not be surprised at all if he creeps his way up to number 2 on the depth chart at some point this season. As of right now, there isn't officially a battle going on for this spot, but competition's always alive and well in NFL training camps, so quite possible that Strange even takes this job before the season begins. Looking now, I guess we'll go to wide receiver next because there's certainly a lot going on here. As you'll notice, we have 13 names up here, and head coach Doug Peterson has been very vocal about the fact that he is very much impressed with all 13 of these guys. There is not a single guy here that they do not like, hence why all 13 of them are on the roster. Obviously, when all's said and done, Jacksonville will probably end up carrying somewhere around 6 if I had to guess, but some of the guys we know will be on the roster. Calvin Ridley, as we mentioned. Zay Jones had certainly a breakout campaign last year. And Christian Kirk. That's a really nice 1-2-3 punch for Trevor Lawerence to work with, especially paired with Evan Ingram and Travis Etienne, who he can utilize in the pass game. And then if players like Tank Bigsby and Brenton Strange can develop into weapons as well, really setting them up for success. Then you also have Jamal Agnew, who was a key player for them, both on offense and on special teams last year, so not a bad fourth receiver at all. Then we still have another 9 players behind them competing for the remaining receiver spots. So may the best men win. And honestly, given the sheer quantity of the competition, whoever emerges victorious from that competition should absolutely be worthy of their roster spot. And definitely intrigued to see if any of these players could be somebody we're talking about later on in the season. Maybe Parker Washington or Kendrick Pryor, Seth Williams, somebody we'll be talking about as fantasy players come like week 10 in the NFL this year. You never know. That's the beauty of it. Could be any one of these guys. Could be a diamond in the rough here. But with that being said, we'll move along to this Jacksonville Jaguars offensive line. And there is a little bit of shuffling going around here, I guess you could say, because their starting left tackle, Cam Robinson, is suspended for the first 4 weeks of the season. So he's not listed on the depth chart up here. As you can see, he's down here, suspended for the first 4 weeks. So as of right now, the third-year man, Walker Little, is penciled in to be the starting left tackle. Although I will also say there is a competition going on at the left guard position between Ben Barch, the fourth-year man, and Tyler Shatley, excuse me. So between Tyler Shatley and Ben Barch for this left guard position. Although once Cam Robinson does return, the expectation, at least as of right now, is that Walker Little will actually take over this left guard position. So just thought that was interesting to note. Looking further at this offensive line, we do have the second-year man, Luke Fortner, as the starting center. Brandon Sheriff at right guard. If we recall, he was a first-round pick of the Washington Commanders back in 2015. He was a top 10 selection, I believe even a top 5 selection. I'll pull that up real quick on the side here, let you know the result of that in a second. But then, as we mentioned, Anton Harrison, the right tackle, starting at the right tackle position in place of the departed, I'm already blanking on his name. The departed Jawan Taylor, excuse me. Don't know how I forgot him already. I'm too busy looking up Brandon Sheriff, sorry, for the Kansas City Chiefs. So now we have Anton Harrison at right tackle, and then Brandon Sheriff, he was a top 10 pick back in, yes, he was the 5th overall selection of the Washington Commanders back in 2015. Shortly after Marcus Mariota and Jameis Winston went at the top of that draft. So all in all, this is not a bad offensive line by any means, despite the fact that they did lose already blanking on his name again. Despite the fact that they lost Jawan Taylor, keep on getting these guys mixed up. My brain's in like 3 places at once right now, excuse me. So despite the fact they lost Jawan Taylor, they do replace him with Anton Harrison, and I am still pretty confident in this Jaguars offensive line. Once Cam Robinson gets back especially. As of right now, I'd say it's probably a below average unit in the NFL. Even saying all of that, they really still don't have a true standout player on this offensive unit. but that's not really the end of the world for them. This is a Jaguars team that has a ton of weapons galore. So if they're just able to scheme this out properly and make the best of what they have, I think they'll be in a good spot. Definitely concerning though, because they don't have a lot of notable players behind them on the offensive line either. So if injury were to occur, they could find themselves quickly in a tight spot. But wouldn't be too concerned with this Jaguars offensive line, although I will say it's probably the weakest part of their offense as a whole. Certainly have a lot of confidence in the quarterback position, certainly have a lot of confidence in the running back position. Love what they did at wide receiver, love what they've been doing at tight end. So if Cam Robinson can get back in there and everybody stays healthy, fingers crossed they'll be all right, but if a major injury were to occur, I definitely have my fears with this Jaguars offensive line. So looking now at the Jaguars defense. And Jacksonville's defense is certainly an interesting one. Unlike when Doug Peterson was in Philadelphia with Jim Schwartz running a 4-3, here Jacksonville is running a 3-4. And I know Doug Peterson's not the defensive coordinator, which that's what makes it interesting though, because you do wonder, right? Like for an offensive coach, does he put a lot of stock in what kind of defensive coordinator he's hiring? Did he make a conscious decision to go, yeah, you know what, we'll roll with a 3-4 now instead of the 4-3? But certainly could just play into the type of personnel they have as well. Certainly seems to fit this roster like a glove, which I think is ultimately what you want to do. You want to have the scheme that matches the talent the best. So now looking at this Jaguars defense more in depth, the defensive line itself, like we've mentioned with some of these other teams that run a 4-3 usually value the line and the linebackers less so, and the other way around as well, which absolutely applies here. Jacksonville really doesn't seem to value this front three all that much. They have Devon Hamilton, Roy Robertson Harris, and geez, I really should look this name up. We'll call him Double F for now, formerly of the New York Jets. Three guys on the down line here who really just serve as sort of pawns, I guess you could call them, in the chess game of the defense. I feel like that's probably... I've been trying to find a good way to really describe how teams view these defensive tackles when they run the 3-4. I feel like that's probably a good way to put it. They're sort of pawns in this chess game, whereas like a player like Josh Allen or Trayvon Walker, they're more of like your queen or your bishop, you know, the pieces that are really making the major impact kind of moves. These guys are going to be setting the tone. They're going to sort of get the opposition where you want them to be. And then Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker are going to come in for the kill, or even a Devin Lloyd or a Kayvon Chason. So, not a bad defensive line for the Jacksonville Jaguars. I would certainly say, much like their offensive line, it's probably a below average unit in the NFL as of right now, but certainly not the worst thing in the world, because we do look at this linebacker position and it really is quite loaded. We have, as I mentioned, Josh Allen and Trayvon Walker on the outside. These two are both going to be just absolutely incredible for the Jacksonville Jaguars this season. Going to be getting to the quarterback, getting their hands on the football, deflecting passes, whatever is required of them, they will be doing it. And then there is a competition going on behind them as well for the whoever rotates in on the outside linebacker position. We have the rookie here, Yasir Abdullah. We also have former first-round pick Kayvon Chason from 2020, selected right before the catastrophe of Jalen Reagor and then Justin Jefferson. And then looking at who else is in the mix here, we have Jordan Smith, the 2021 fourth-round pick, so now entering his third season. So certainly a lot of young talent at this outside linebacker position. Even Josh Allen, still pretty young player as well, and Trayvon Walker only in his second year as the first overall pick from the 2022 draft. So certainly encouraging with their outside linebacker position. And then even if we go into the inside here, Devin Lloyd, their their second first round pick from the 2022 draft after Trayvon Walker. He figures to be the starter. And then on the opposite end here, we have, these guys with their last names. Foysad Olukun, hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I feel like that was actually a pretty good guess at that one, but behind those two guys, we do have a competition going on for the reserve positions, and it's a three-way competition between Ventrell Miller, the fourth-round pick rookie for the Jacksonville Jaguars this year, fourth-year player Shaquille Quarterman, drafted back in 2020, and Caleb Johnson, the veteran. So certainly some depth at this linebacker position. And I think this is probably the strongest aspect of this defense, and frankly, I don't believe it's even close. This defensive line is certainly a little bit subpar for the NFL, although this linebacking core for the Jaguars is absolutely one of the better ones in the entire National Football League right now. Always helps when you run a 3-4, like I said, to have a strong linebacking core, but love what they have on the outside and love the depth they have both outside and in. Now finally, we'll wrap this up with the secondary. And Jacksonville's secondary, again, pretty much like every team in the AFC South, it seems, they have a pretty poor secondary. Not really too much going on here. So Tyson Campbell and Darius Williams are currently slated to be their starting cornerbacks. And there's really not too much of a competition going on for those starting positions. And as you can see, not really a lot of draft capital being invested into these cornerback positions, at least not recently. Then they have Trey Herndon at the nickel spot as well. Finally, we'll look at safety. They have Rashawn Jenkins and Andre Sisco slated as their starters, although there is a competition going on for this backup free safety role between rookie Antonio Harris and fourth-year player Daniel Thomas, another former fifth-round pick. So certainly interested to see how that shakes out. Antonio Johnson is somebody that I do remember looking into before the 2023 draft, and I certainly believe Jacksonville got a tremendous value with him in the 5th round. I'll check back real quick. I want to say he went to Texas A&M. So like that pick for the Jacksonville Jaguars there, and who knows if they potentially need a free safety if Andre Sisco leaves after his rookie deal's up. Who knows, maybe he could develop into somebody who could step in there. So certainly worth keeping an eye on that. Jacksonville seems they need all the help they could get in the secondary right now. This really is a factor too in when they're having to come back from these huge deficits like they did against the Cowboys or against the Chargers in the playoffs. You need better play from the secondary. You can't let Mike Williams and Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler just run rampant all over you. So going forward with the Jaguars, I would certainly say this is a position I would look to address, probably even more so than the defensive line, because the defensive line can be masked to a degree by the linebacker play. But I don't think the same could be said of the secondary. The secondary could certainly be exposed against the right team, certainly with all the great quarterback and receiver talent in the AFC. So that being said, let's see how Jacksonville puts this all together in the 2023 schedule. Now, for the first 4 games, as we mentioned, they will be without Cam Robinson, but I don't think these games are really going to be too contentious either way. I think it's pretty safe to say they will defeat the Indianapolis Colts and Houston Texans in weeks 1 and 3, despite the fact that they are divisional matchups. And then in week 2, don't think it's too controversial to say that the Kansas City Chiefs will defeat Jacksonville. But hey, if the Jacksonville Jaguars are able to defeat the Kansas City Chiefs without Cam Robinson, maybe Jacksonville's better than anyone could have even imagined here. So moving along, they do have Atlanta in that final game in London, actually, before Cam Robinson comes back. So I think they will still be able to defeat Atlanta, even without Cam Robinson, but this could certainly be a shootout. Looking at week 5, they actually stay in London, so I guess Cam Robinson's going to have to come out to London there sometime during that week 4, week 5 split there at around the turn of September to October. And they get the Buffalo Bills in there the second week, and who knows, maybe with a fully rested Cam Robinson, they'll be able to make this game really competitive against the Bills, but I do think Buffalo is just a little bit too much for them right now. Stephon Diggs going up against that Jaguars secondary, I really don't like that matchup. This is what I mean when I say that Jacksonville, if they want to hang with the big dogs in the AFC, they're going to need to do something about that secondary, because right now, by the looks of it, I look at this week 5 matchup and Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs should be able to really eat these guys alive. Same thing with Patrick Mahomes and company in week 2. Moving on, though, to week 6, they do have a nice stretch here where I think they could defeat the Indianapolis Colts and New Orleans Saints with relative ease, even on a short week. And then they get the Pittsburgh Steelers on extended rest in week 8. And this could be a really fun matchup to watch. 1 o'clock game. This honestly could be a sneaky primetime game. I don't know who the Sunday night matchup is that week, but I would love to watch this game on a Sunday night. Jacksonville against the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, I definitely think it could be competitive. Pittsburgh, I am very high on as well. I think they're certainly going to surprise some people this year, but I think this is one of those games where Jacksonville's going to dig deep and they're going to find a way. They'll be going into their Week 9 bye week with a 5-3 record, which is certainly nothing to be discouraged about. Certainly when, wait, I'm sorry, 6-2. I don't know why I said 5-3. So 6-2 record, and the two losses are to the Chiefs and Bills. So definitely can't feel bad about that. In fact, I'd be feeling really good about that if I were the Jacksonville Jaguars. Certainly beats being 3-7 going into the bye like they were last year. So emerging from the bye week, they have two home games against the San Francisco 49ers and Tennessee Titans. Now, I do think San Francisco ends up winning this game. San Francisco's also coming off of their bye. And San Francisco, absolutely loaded defense, and looking at that offense, even with some of the concerns they have at quarterback and potentially on the offensive line, their skill positions are going to be too much for Jacksonville, sad as it is to say. I just think about Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey going up against this Jaguars defense, and doesn't match up well for the Jaguars. So unless Trevor Lawerence is really able to rally against this 49ers defense, I just don't see it. At least not right now. So I'll give this one to the 49ers then. Week 11, they're at home against the Tennessee Titans, and they very well could win this game, but I didn't want to have them going 6-0 in the division. I felt like they're going to lose at least one of these games. And probably if it is to any team, it's likely going to be Tennessee. I have a pretty hard time imagining Houston or especially Indianapolis winning against the Jacksonville Jaguars, but I could certainly see Tennessee picking off a game. So give Tennessee the nod here in Week 11. Speaking of the Texans, Jaguars get them next in Week 12. I think this is another pretty slam dunk win for the Jaguars, at least as much as they could get in the National Football League in 2023. But then Week 13, big matchup on a Monday night against the Cincinnati Bengals. This should be a fun one. Monday night game in December between two teams likely competing for playoff positioning. This could be a potential playoff preview down the line. Would love to see this game in January as a rematch, but give Cincinnati the nod here right now. I think Cincinnati's really going to be coming into their stride as we turn the calendar to December. They seem to be a team that really catches fire in November and December. So give Cincinnati that one. Not really too much of a slight against the Jaguars, and they actually end up with 3 straight matchups here against the AFC North, and I actually have them losing all 3 of them. So sort of the same deal with the Browns and Ravens. Really talented teams. I love what the Browns and Ravens have on the offensive line, so certainly going to be a solid matchup against that Jaguars front 3. And looking at what Baltimore has at wide receiver, again, I just think about like Odell Beckham, Zay Flowers, Devin Duvernay, Rashad Bateman going up against this Jaguars secondary. I do not like that matchup in the slightest. Then with the Cleveland Browns, you have Nick Chubb, of course, Deshaun Watson, Amari Cooper, David Njoku, a lot of weapons on that offense as well. Same thing with the Cincinnati Bengals, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Tyler Boyd going up against that Jags secondary. Don't love these matchups for the Jags, and that's why I think while Jacksonville probably does make the playoffs again this year, they do need to do some improvements, especially on defense, if they want to go on a deep playoff run, if they want to make it out of that second round, really have a good shot at competing for a Super Bowl. And I don't think they're far off, is the really exciting part with this team. They are really just missing a couple pieces, I think. But finishing out the season, I do have them ending on a 3-game win streak against the Tampa Bay Bucks, their fellow Florida team, Carolina Panthers, another team with a first overall pick at quarterback, and then finally a potential winner-go-home game yet again against the Tennessee Titans in Week 18. This time in Tennessee, could very well be flexed into Sunday night yet again if this is for the division, but hypothetically we give this game to Tennessee, they would win the division and bump Jacksonville down to 10th in the conference, but I don't believe that to be the case. I think Jacksonville does take this game, especially since I had them losing to Tennessee earlier in the season, and Jacksonville would end up finishing 4th in the AFC South. But going back to my overall predictions for the playoffs, so this would set them up with a matchup with the Los Angeles Chargers at home yet again in Week 1 of the playoffs, and I would have the Los Angeles Chargers winning this matchup this time around. So You could say it's a step forward for the Jaguars because they go 10-7 this year as opposed to 9-8, but big picture, you could certainly say it's a step back because instead of winning a playoff game and then going out in the second round, they lose in the first round. But certainly nothing to be upset about if it does shake out this way. Jacksonville hasn't made the playoffs in consecutive years since the 1990s, so absolutely excited for the Jaguars fans, for County of Duval, for Doug Peterson, Trevor Lawerence, all the players involved in this team. They really do seem to have a lovely culture down there. And certainly plays into the fact, too, that I don't think it's mentioned with Jacksonville enough is the city of Jacksonville doesn't have any other major professional sports teams. I know they do have some other more minor league teams for sports, but they don't have like a Major League Baseball team or an NBA team or even a National Hockey League team. It's just the Jaguars, and I think as a result, the community really does rally around this team, and they do really love them. Their fan base is one of the more underrated ones in the NFL for sure. So absolutely rooting for them to have success this season. I hope things do shake out this way for them. I would love to see Trevor Lawerence get some MVP love. Would love to see them win the AFC South again. I would certainly love to see them go on a little run in this AFC, but I don't think they're there quite yet. Think with another solid draft maybe in 2024, another solid offseason, they could really be a contender in 2024 and beyond, especially as we start to see some of these teams like the Buffalo Bills, Los Angeles Chargers, Cincinnati Bengals have to face the music of paying their quarterbacks big money and have to deal with the repercussions of that. Jacksonville will certainly get there too, but they're still a little bit of ways away compared to those teams. But that being said, let's segue right into the Jaguars salary cap because this is certainly fascinating to look at. Jacksonville right up against the cap for the next 2 seasons, but then it looks like absolutely a ton of money available in 2025, right in time to give Trevor Lawerence a contract extension. So, as we could see, Trevor Lawerence signed for the next 2 seasons plus a potential 2025 club option. CJ Beathard signed for the next 2 years as the backup, not really too much to note there. Running back, you have Travis Etienne on pretty much the same situation as Trevor Lawerence, potential option for 2025. Down at wide receiver, Christian Kirk signed for the next 3 seasons on that big money deal. Then Zay Jones signed for just the next 2. Calvin Ridley is signed for just this season, although if he does sign an extension, it will cost the Jaguars some draft capital to Atlanta, as we will briefly review in a second here, but I imagine Calvin Ridley probably does get an extension from the Jaguars. Certainly if he proves to be an elite number 1 option for Trevor Lawerence, it could really unlock another gear of this offense if Calvin Ridley can be the player it looked like he was turning into in Atlanta. So moving down to tight end, Evan Engram signed at a reasonable cap for the next 2 years, although it does balloon to $19 million in 2025. This deal could certainly be restructured in some fashion if it even gets to that point. Evan Engram might not even be there come 2025. Perhaps that was part of the logic behind drafting Brenton Strange. Then looking down at the offensive line, Cam Robinson, Brandon Sheriff signed for the next 2 years. Then we have Anton Harrison, of course, for the next 4 years, plus a potential 5th-year club option. Love to see that. Then Tyler Shatley and Ben Barch, the 2 players competing for that left guard position, both in contract years. Although Walker Little could very well be there as well, and he signed for the next 2 seasons. So Jacksonville's certainly going to have to invest some more money in this offensive line shortly, but looks like they're going to have the flexibility to do so. They will have to pay Calvin Ridley as well, and Trevor Lawerence, Travis Etienne at some point, but only 154 against the cap in 25, so they'll certainly have a margin to do so. Looking now at the defense, really not a lot invested on this defensive line, to nobody's surprise. Not a very remarkable defensive line here, but perhaps that'll open up some opportunities for them to bring in some more established talent down the line. Then at linebacker, Josh Allen in a contract year, so certainly want to see him extended as soon as possible. Trayvon Walker still for another 3 years. Kayvon Chason also in a contract year. If he exceeds expectations, I would like to see him be extended. It does appear as if they did decline his 5th-year rookie option, so certainly speaks to how much confidence they have in his abilities, though having Trayvon Walker and Josh Allen certainly does alleviate some of the pressure to pick that up. They could probably sign him for less than that option was worth on just a normal contract extension. Then finally, looking at the secondary here, Darius Williams, only real notable player on a big money contract here, although Rayshawn Jenkins does have a notable cap hit as well, each just for the next 2 seasons. Of course, these yellow years are void years, and really not too much else doing here, so Jacksonville certainly is going to need to start laying the seeds now for when they inevitably pay Trevor Lawerence. I imagine Trevor Lawerence is probably going to get a contract. By the time he's due for a contract, he probably will be making north of $50 million a season, especially, excuse me, if he does have the type of season that we anticipate this season. So you're going to need to come up with another $40 million in cap space just to accommodate him. So that would leave them with some room still come 2025 and beyond, but like we just reviewed, they will have to pay some other players too. Travis Etienne needs his cut, Calvin Ridley needs his, gonna need to pay some guys on this offensive line, gonna need to pay Josh Allen, gonna need to pay eventually Trayvon Walker as well, so certainly interesting to see how Jacksonville handles this, but as of right now, they have the luxury of a great quarterback on a cheap deal, so enjoy it while you can, Jaguars fans. I would certainly say Jacksonville is going to try to capitalize on that. The window for winning in the NFL certainly seems to be while quarterbacks, star quarterbacks in particular, are on that rookie deal. So briefly, we will look at the Jaguars' future draft pick situation before we end this video. So the big thing here is this Calvin Ridley trade. They will owe a pick to the Atlanta Falcons here for some degree, whether it's a 4, a 3, or a 2. As of right now, it would at least be a 3 if I had to guess, because it does look like Calvin Ridley will make the Jaguars' final roster. So that would be the base, at least a 3rd-round pick going to the Falcons. But if Calvin Ridley's the player the Jaguars think he can be, absolutely worth it. And even would be worth it as a 2nd-round pick if Calvin Ridley signs a contract extension. Because if you keep Calvin Ridley in-house, that means he had a good season, and that means he's going to be here for a while. So more than worth it for a 2nd-round pick to get that type of production in return. So they'd still have a 1st-round pick, a 3rd-rounder, 2 4th-round picks, and 2 6th-round picks. So I would certainly like to see them, and they'll have 2 7th-round picks in 2026. It's pretty random, but would certainly like to see them address the secondary in this draft. Wouldn't be opposed to them addressing the defensive line, even picking up another offensive lineman. Feel like their skill positions on offense are in a really good spot right now. Linebacker position's in a fantastic spot right now. Just need a little bit of tinkering. Just improve in the trenches a little bit. Definitely need to improve that secondary, but Jacksonville's a team that I feel like is absolutely trending in the absolutely fantastic direction, honestly. And I think Jacksonville could serve as, excuse my screen there, could certainly serve as a blueprint, if I can talk, could serve as a blueprint for a lot of these other younger teams in the National Football League. I think about the teams with the younger quarterbacks drafted this season, say the Carolina Panthers, the Houston Texans, or even the Indianapolis Colts in their own division there, Texans and the Colts. Jaguars could be a nice blueprint for them. Shows that you get that franchise quarterback in there, get the right head coach in there, get the right skill position players around them, start developing that culture. The sky's the limit. And while they may have a rough rookie season, which I certainly anticipate could be the case for Anthony Richardson and CJ Stroud in particular, doesn't mean his career is going to be terrible. We saw that with Trevor Lawerence. He had a rough rookie campaign in 2021, and he had a really solid season last year. Was certainly a top 10 quarterback by any way you slice it, really, any stretch of the imagination. And now in 2023, I think he's only going to look to build on that, especially as some of these quarterbacks who are older maybe start to regress a little bit. I know it is certainly becoming a young quarterbacks league right now. Players like Tom Brady now out of the picture. Guys who were around for a long time, even before Trevor Lawerence came in the league, now out of the picture. Drew Brees, Phillip Rivers, Ben Roethlisberger, you name it, Eli Manning, all gone. So and potentially Aaron Rodgers in the next couple seasons here as well. So players are going to need to step up into that role. And while, yes, there's a ton of hype around Patrick Mahomes, much deserved, and even Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, don't forget about Trevor Lawrence. I think he could be right there with those guys by the time this season's over. I think Jacksonville could certainly be one of those teams we're talking about as one of the AFC's elites going forward, especially if teams like Buffalo or Cincinnati take a bit of a step back. Certainly, Kansas City is also a possibility. Can't really go anywhere but down once you're the Super Bowl champion, unless they repeat, of course, but we shall see. Would love to hear from any Jaguars fans, anybody down there in Duval. How do you feel about the Jags this year? How are you feeling about Trevor Lawrence's MVP odds? What do you think about the defense? Is that going to be what really hurts this team's chances in the postseason, or am I just really overstating that? Is that not going to matter? The Jaguars just going to be able to rally from any deficit that they seem to find themselves in. So, love to hear from any Jags fans down below. I think they certainly take the AFC South, and who knows, they could end up making some noise in the playoffs this year. I won't count them out. Look forward to talking to you guys in the next video where, as this ad suggests, we'll talk about who could catch the Kansas City Chiefs. So, talk to you guys then.